Meet Jack Churchill. This man fought Nazis in World War II with bagpipes, a Scottish sword, and a longbow. Mad Jack, as he was called, would often charge into battle with a sword, playing his bagpipe. He escaped from a Nazi prison camp, received multiple military awards, and was disappointed when the war was over. So, just who was he? John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born in 1906 in British Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, into an unremarkable family. He wasn't related to Winston Churchill. A year later, his family moved back to Surrey on the outskirts of London. After a rather unremarkable childhood, most of it spent in a boarding school on the Isle of Man, he attended the Royal Military College, graduating in 1926, joining the British Army, and then served in Burma, now Myanmar. He left the army a decade later, in 1936. Throughout his time in the army, he played some small parts in some films, using his bagpiping and archery talents. A couple of years later, after he left the army in 1938, he won second place in a bagpiping competition, and a year after that, in 1939, he represented Britain at the World Archery Championships, winning 26th overall. This is when World War II broke out. He rejoined the British Army, more specifically the Manchester Regiment, and went to France following the Nazi invasion of it in 1940. In May of that year, Churchill, along with some of his men, ambushed a Nazi patrol, with Churchill giving the signal to attack by raising his sword. Next month, in June 1940, he joined the Commandos, which was a force that was designed to carry out raids against Nazi-occupied Europe. A year after that, in December 1941, he took part in Operation Archery, a raid in German-occupied Norway, charging into battle after playing on his bagpipes in the bitter Norwegian winter. For this, and for his actions in previous battles, he received the Military Cross and Bar, an award in the British Army for, quote, gallantry during active operations against the enemy. 2 years after that, in 1943, he took part in the Allied invasion of Sicily. It was then that he famously led the No. 2 Commandos into battle with a sword on his waist, bagpipes under his arm, and a longbow around his neck. During the invasion of Sicily, he and a fellow corporal infiltrated the town of Molina, taking 42 Nazis prisoner. For this, he won the Distinguished Service Order. The year after that, 1944, Churchill, along with some fellow commandos, went to Yugoslavia as part of the MacLean mission. In one incident, Churchill was with 6 others, and an artillery shell killed or wounded everybody but him. What did Churchill do? He played his bagpipes until he got knocked unconscious by a grenade, and then he was captured by the Nazis. Since his last name was Churchill, the Germans thought he was related to Winston Churchill, the then Prime Minister of Britain, and they sent him to Berlin for interrogation. Afterwards, he was sent to a prisoner of war camp within the grounds of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. He escaped along with some other British officers and walked over 100 miles by foot before getting captured again. Eventually, he was freed in April 1945, just before the Nazi regime surrendered to the Allied powers. At this time, however, the war with Japan was still ongoing, and so he went to Burma, now Myanmar, to fight against the Japanese Empire. However, on his way, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, and less than a week later, Japan surrendered. Churchill was reportedly upset, saying, quote, if it wasn't for those Yanks, we could have kept the war going for another 10 years. After the war ended, he became a parachutist and was sent to British Palestine, where he coordinated rescue and evacuation efforts for civilians under attack in the area. After that, he became an instructor at a land-air warfare training school in Australia, and he also picked up surfing. He went back to England, built his own 16-foot surfboard, almost 5 meters long, and became the first man to ride a tidal bore in 1955, riding one for over a mile. He retired from the British Army in 1959, his rank being a lieutenant colonel, or if you're British, lieutenant colonel. He lived out the rest of his days in England, throwing his suitcase out of the train window into his own backyard while the train was still running, so he didn't have to carry it home from the train station. He died in 1966 at the age of 89. So, that's the story of Mad Jack Churchill. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and like. Thank you for watching Explained. New videos every other Friday.